In numerous arenas, from creation science to cultural gun control aversion, America strikes many of us as the world's champion of misinformation and lunacy. Nowhere is this dubious distinction more stunning than in the domain of global climate change. Scientists internationally have arrived at a clear consensus on climate change. For example, in the view of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and 17 other U.S. scientific organizations, observations throughout the world make it clear that climate change is occurring, and rigorous scientific research demonstrates that the greenhouse gases emitted by human activities are the primary driver. It's no accident that this statement comes from Americans. The sheer number of brilliant Americans represents one of the great achievements of any society. But America also has a very dark and overfed underbelly. The reason? Let's call it GIGO. Garbage in, garbage out. Intellectually speaking, you are what you eat, and many Americans have a diet of seriously foul intellectual gruel, to say nothing of all those pork rinds. Let me start with the garbage out part, because its staggering scale is something regular folks like you and me can have trouble getting our heads around, a little like the distance to the Andromeda Galaxy or the vast popular appeal of the Kardashians. A survey published in 2011 showed that Americans are about 10 times more likely to believe that people will never be harmed by climate change, compared to respondents from the other 14 countries surveyed. More than a few Americans have their heads in the sand. But who exactly are they? Many American ostriches can be pigeonholed, it seems. A survey found that while 45% of Democrats thought that global warming is already harming Americans, 33% of Republicans and 51% of Tea Party members felt that it will never harm Americans. But here's the kicker. The Tea Party members were much more likely to say that they are very well informed about global warming than the other groups. And if you're thinking that they're just a small lunatic fringe, consider a 2011 poll indicating that 1 in 3 American adults supported the Tea Party. To understand the source of this alternate universe, let's consider the garbage in half of the equation. A 2009 Pew Research survey showed that 41% of Americans use either CNN or Fox News as their main source of news. Fox News claims its programming is fair and balanced, but a 2012 study suggests otherwise. It found nearly 60% of Fox News shows had a dismissive tone toward climate change, while more than 70% of CNN and MSNBC shows accepted it. Okay, so I guess we saw that coming. Less predictable, perhaps, was the finding in the same study that the connection between watching cable news and accepting or questioning global warming is stronger among Republicans than among Democrats. The garbage cycle continues. Maybe this is what American exceptionalism means. In rich countries, we've gotten really good at making lots of money, consuming lots of stuff, and having babies who grow up and do more of the same. But some people, you know, are never satisfied. Take economists. You would have been hard-pressed in 2007 to find more than 1 or 2 of them on the whole planet who had a fragment of a clue that the Great Recession was about to happen. Nevertheless, when it's observed that birth rates in Italy have fallen decisively, economists confidently warn of dire consequences for the living standards of Italians. Falling fertility, and the presumed consequence of fewer workers and more retirees, is bad for everyone, right? Well, that's the theory, but maybe the theory is wrong. In fact, the pseudoscience of neoclassical economics is a house of cards based largely on a set of equations inexplicably adapted from a physicist's conservation of energy equations in the 19th century, and ignores broader global realities. As noted by historian Robert Nadeau, because neoclassical economics does not even acknowledge the costs of environmental problems and the limits of economic growth, it constitutes one of the greatest barriers to combating climate change and other threats to the planet. Economists sought to join us in the 21st century, but they're not the only ones lost in the past. Industrialists have long supported robust fertility for obvious reasons. Babies grow up to buy the stuff they're selling. Religious organizations have done much the same, for comparable reasons. Governments, ever mindful of military and economic threats, both real and imagined, have used public policy to promote ever-increasing numbers of taxpayers and potential soldiers through higher birth rates. Our civilization's most powerful entities are on the same page. So the ostriches rule, and we like it just fine. We get to consume big and make babies aplenty with the blessing of our institutions. Growing wealth, population, and consumerism are accepted as central to our way of life, but we shouldn't accept it anymore. During the Cold War, America and the old Soviet Union believed, as sovereign states, that they should have all the nuclear weapons they wanted, enough to unleash Armageddon. And mostly, we trusted them to keep it under control. Today, faced with a much more gradual degradation of the planet, our general complacency is perhaps even more understandable. As before, our leaders mostly assure us that we don't need to make any uncomfortable changes. We can just keep paying our taxes, raising our families, and consuming. Our governments will handle climate change, they tell us. Sadly, they're not handling it well. The government action is timid. The Kyoto Protocol is widely viewed as a failure. Emissions continue to increase, and most countries, even many of those that signed and ratified Kyoto, are not subject to any binding limits. It could take decades for a groundswell of concern to spur adequate government action. As citizens, we can't wait for that. We need to act now. In World War II, millions of ordinary citizens made painful sacrifices, many giving up their lives, because there was a general confidence that what they were doing was necessary and right. Times change. Today, compared to the World War II generation, we're weak, coddled, adrift, like adolescents in need of mentoring. An unfair comparison, maybe. But surely we can agree that the pace of global change is unprecedented and that we're failing to keep up. Science has given us compelling reasons to act, every bit as clear as the reasons to fight Hitler, if we choose to. Tragically, however, business as usual persists, imperiling future generations. To us, those future generations, victims, are remote and visible. But they're not abstractions. They're going to be just as alive as we are, with the same rights we hold dear. Psychologists have names for the strategies we all use to cope with uncomfortable realities: denial, judgmental discounting. Many of us believe that our personal actions are insignificant, so we do nothing. Some of us are even convinced that everything, even perhaps our own inaction, is God's will and must be accepted. The status quo is comfortable. And yet, we accept uncomfortable changes all the time. When we have to wait in traffic because a bridge is being repaired, some complain, but most of us roll with it, knowing the work is necessary. Can we convince ourselves that confronting climate change is necessary? It shouldn't be difficult. We need only imagine how our descendants will regard us if we fail. So, to be kind ancestors, what should we do? We know many good answers: using less electricity, burning less gasoline, recycling, planting trees, pestering politicians. These are not controversial. But there is an elephant in the room, a largely ignored force multiplier: having fewer children. All things being equal, fewer people mean less environmental impact. The author of The Population Bomb, Paul Ehrlich, summarized this as I equals PAT. That is, environmental impact is a function of population, affluence, and technology. A and T essentially represent consumption, a key measure of which is carbon dioxide emissions per capita. For example, according to the World Bank, the average Liberian is responsible for 0.1 metric tons of CO2 each year, and the average American, 17.3. Crunching more of the World Bank numbers, we find that the average American's CO2 emissions are equal to those of about 3.7 Swedes, 25 Filipinos, or 173 Ethiopians. So if an average American couple chooses to have 3 children, they're adding to the world's population the equivalent of about 11 Swedes, 75 Filipinos, or 520 Ethiopians in terms of present-day CO2 emissions. Now, if we live greener, we can expect lower CO2 emissions over time. And in fact, since 1980, the World Bank numbers show American per capita outputs have fallen by 17% in about 3 decades. But in those same 3 decades, about 100 million American babies have been born. In terms of current carbon emissions, that's the equivalent of adding about 370 million Swedes, 2.5 billion Filipinos, or 17 billion Ethiopians. Scarier still, our good life is widely seen as a model. If we keep consuming and procreating as we are, we can expect new Asian and African middle classes to do the same. I don't even want to think about that, but we better think about it because that prospect is staring us in the face. Other worrisome possibilities are less obvious, but we better think about them also. Many of these will flow from biodiversity loss. We have already driven untold thousands of species to extinction, destroying what the eminent biologist and Pulitzer Prize-winning author Edward Wilson calls vast potential biological wealth. Another prominent voice for the environment, broadcaster and naturalist Sir David Attenborough, has sounded an even more urgent alarm. We are a plague on the earth. Either we limit our population growth, or the natural world will do it for us. Which may be just as well. We love our toys, our cars, our home theaters, our pot-scrubbing dishwashers, and we love our kids and try to give them even better toys than we have. All of which can be okay up to a point, but the devil, alas, is in the details. Ostriches are not the most intelligent animals in the world, but let's give discredit where discredit is due. They don't bury their heads in the sand. We do. Looking for someone to sell a toaster as a time machine, or simply pretend that something in plain view just isn't there? Call a human. That's where the devil comes in. Today, the forces in our civilization and in each of us making us want more, consume more, and pass these traits on to new generations are thriving. Satisfying all our desires is clearly at odds with a hopeful future, but mostly we play dumb. Can you hear the devil laughing? No, it isn't just Tea Partiers or Rush Limbaugh who are conveniently ignorant. To one degree or another, it's you and me. The metaphorical ostrich is within every one of us. Let's pull our heads out of the sand, fast, for the children, and for their children.